Hello everyone on this beautiful Saturday. So I'm Martin Pitt. I work in Red Hat's Cockpit team. But Cockpit is not the thing I'm going to talk about today. Can you understand me at the back row? Because saw voice and everything. OK. So today I want to demo the current state-of-the-art of browser automation. So you want to use that when you want to automatically download your daily webcomic, or you perhaps want to automate filling out a complicated form which doesn't have a proper API. Or, like that's close to my heart, if you want to automatically test your website or your web application. And I want to start with a little history. So, the first kind of framework which did that was Selenium. That started in the mid-2000s. So that supports all the major browsers. It was very popular and is still today. And because of that, it was even standardized in 2018 by the W3C as the WebDriver protocol. And that was a simple HTTP command response protocol. And as such, it had no support for events or notifications. That means for more complex web pages, like you always needed to resort to polling, which made tests like slow and complicated and brittle. And it was also lacking like some low-level browser control. And you can tell, like it shows its age. It was written for a simpler world when websites weren't the complicated beast that they are today. And so to mitigate this restriction, in about the mid-2010s, Chrome introduced the DevTools protocol. So that was a completely new thing from the ground up. That is a JSON stream protocol, and as such, it can also support event notifications. So it can tell you when things happen or logs happen and so on. And that allows you to write these tests in a much more robust and also faster way, because you can do away with the polling. And it has also great low-level browser control. So there is APIs for just about anything that you can do with the browser, be that SSL, policy handling, file uploads, you name it. But unlike the Selenium, which requires a lot of software to run it, the CDP is built directly into the browser. So the cool thing was you didn't need a lot of software to use it. You could just use the standard browser and didn't need much else. But unfortunately, it is not an open standard. So this was specific to Chromium. Firefox had implemented a reasonable subset of it, but eventually they removed it again because it had too many quirks. And now we enter the year 2023, and now we finally have a solution to this. So the W3C introduced an extension to the WebDriver protocol called BiDi. That stands for bidirectional, and that gives a hint to the fact that it, of course, also supports the notifications and events. So like CDP, it is a streaming protocol with JSON, but unlike CDP, it is an open WebDriver. It's an open standard. It's currently in draft, but very mature already. And similarly, it's supposed to be directly built into the browsers. So for Firefox, you only really need your standard Firefox thing, and then anything that speaks WebSocket, like a WebSocket command line tool, or Python AIO HTTP, or use Node, or there's a bunch of Rust crates. Like every popular language these days should be able to talk to that. And so I want to demo how this works. I have a little GitHub repository that's also linked from the talk, so you should be able to find it easily. And that has a bunch of crappy shell scripts, which demonstrate how this works on the wire. And then later on, also a Python library, which, well, makes the whole thing pleasant to use. And that's what I wanted to show off today. Hang on. So what I did here, like this is the repository. It has an index HTML. You see it's very big, 600 bytes. It's just a simple counter, and this is what we want to test and automatically drive. And I started a tiny web server here. So the first thing that we need to do is start the browser and ask it to get this WebSocket control, like a WebSocket, where we can speak that protocol. So let's show the Chromium one. It's not such a big thing. As I said, we start Chrome and ask it. And then here we ask it some magic incantation that essentially says, give me a WebDriver BiDi control socket. And then we get a lengthy JSON response, we parse that, and the thing we are interested in is the bit that gives you the socket address. And then we wait for enter, and then we clean up. So when we do this, see a bunch of output here. So we see there's a chromium appearing, and that's the bit that we are interested in. So this is now a WebSocket address that we can talk to. And I want to start with the very most basal thing. So we talk that protocol directly. So as I said, it's a JSON string protocol. So let's do something very simple. We asked, which also demonstrates the new feature. So we asked the browser, tell us when something happens. So let's just ask it, give us log entries, and I'm interested in whenever the browser loads a new web page. And we can do that with this incantation here. So that's called session subscribe. That's essentially a thing to say, give me these events that I have here. And it gives me a success message, that's fine. And now whenever we do, with the browser does something, like open a web page, we see we get that event here with a bunch of information. Or if the web page does like a console log, that's the other event we subscribe to. We get this log entry edit event. And like similar to this, you have like a bunch of events that can drive your test because the web is asynchronous, so there's often waiting conditions. But so this shows you how the protocol works at the wire. But of course, this is a very cumbersome way to interact with it. So if you do anything more sensible, you of course need to write scripts for that. So let's stop this here. To drive my web counter, as the next level, I wrote a little script that, where was it? Yeah, a shell script. That drives my web counter. So as you can see, it is still basically doing the same thing. It's calling WebSocket here. Oops. And then it formats the input and output a little more nicely with JQ so that us humans can read it more nicely. And then it does essentially more of what I've just done. Like it pipes JSON into WebSocket and gets the result. And I want to signal step through it and see what it does. So again, it needs that WebSocket URL. Whoop. So the first thing we need to do is some technicality, script get realms. This gives you something like a default context. BiDi can talk to many different web pages or tabs or iframes. So of course you need to tell it like what's the specific target I'm talking to, and that's called the context. So this is what we are getting here. As I said, this is not super interesting, but we are mostly interested in that magic number here. And now we get to a more interesting thing. We want to open a web page. That is the browsing context navigate API call. So let me show this in the spec, how this looks like. So the spec tells us, like, this is the call. It tells us what it does. And expects two parameters, context and URL, and an optional wait thing. And then at the bottom, like, it tells you exactly what it does. So this is how this is the reference documentation of what this API can do. Like when you see there's lots of things. Okay, if we do this, and we see, yes, the browser actually opened my web page. That's nice. And I get a successful response here. And the next thing we want to do is to click that Add One button. And again, this is a series of steps. So first, we need to locate that object as the browser automation would see it. This is called locate nodes. So in this case, we do use a CSS selector with hash button. So we know the ID of that button is btn. So let's do that. And we get a response that gives us a whole load of information, which is essentially an internal representation, how the API can identify that button. We don't really need to be concerned with it. The only thing is to take it and then pass it on to the next API call. And that, of course, would be, we want to click that. And once again, that might be a little surprising. Clicking is actually quite a complicated operation. As I said, it's a very low-level protocol. So clicking means moving the mouse to the thing, pressing down the button and releasing it. So of course, that seems a little cumbersome, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. So like you can do any kind of drag events or control the speed or do touch events and whatnot. So in this essence, it's the pointer move, and we give it the thing that we just received, then pointer down, pointer up. And now if I press enter, we see that the counter increased to 1, and you probably saw the add 1 button flicker a little bit. And finally, we want to check the result. So we want to get the span, like the counter value there. We can do this with a JavaScript query, like we do document query selector and then get the text content. And of course, you can run arbitrary JavaScript in the context of that page. So we use script evaluate, and it gives us this string, like the one that we see back there. And this would be what like the validation part of the test would do. Like this is the content of that span that we queried. Because you look skeptical. Questions later on, huh? Okay, and that's basically it. And as I said, we could do the same thing with Firefox. So you see this is Firefox now. And since this is standardized, we can use the exact same script with Firefox. And I mean, I'm going through it quickly. I don't have that much time, but you can basically see it's doing a comparable thing. And in the end, we click the button and get the 0, and that's it. So for simple thing, this is actually all that you need. Like if you really only need to do like 2 or 3 clicks. But of course, like if you want to do something more serious, like all this manual JSONery is like not really good. So if you want to get a little more fanciful with this, like for example, in the Cockpit project, we have a 500-line Python library which abstracts away all of this and gets the browser bring up and shut down and so on. So, and then it would look more like this. So at the beginning, you decide whether you want Firefox or Chromium, and then a BiDi call would look more like a functional style that we are used to. And yeah, at the top here, I have a mouse helper, which essentially abstracts this pointer move, a click, and release. So that a mouse click is just like a wait mouse, and you say where you want to click on. So not super surprising now, but I can tell I want to show a browser or not. Of course, you can also run headless, and I want to run with Firefox. And then you can see, focus. It does all the things that I did before, except that we are now express it in a more comfortable language. But in the logging, you still see what's going on the wire. Like the whole JSON input and output is still there. Yeah, and that's basically it. As I said, you can play around with it. And I think we have 2 minutes or so for questions. He was first.
With what things can you interact with? For example, if I wanted to access some details of the developer tools of the network tab, security, and check what algorithms are being used to establish connections, is that something you can do through this?
So the question is it possible to interact with the developer tools? I don't think this is a BiDi thing, because BiDi works across browsers, and it's not standardized what developers' tools can do. So in this case, you would have to refer to, for example, Chrome DevTools protocol if it's Chromium. For Firefox, I'm not aware of some API. So that is outside. But of course, everything else in the browser, like downloads and so on, is covered. I think you were next, yeah?
Yeah. What's the status of support for this WebDriver BiDi draft standard? You said it's draft standard, right?
Yes, so the question is, what's the status of this? Yes, it is draft. I mean, I have no insight when it will be finalized, but I know that both Chromium and Firefox have like lots of tests, and they implemented to the letter. I've contributed to it myself. So I have a feeling it's pretty standard, like it's pretty solid at this point.
And what's the status of support in other browsers?
Safari, I don't know. I don't know. You were next, yeah?
Do you know if this BiDi is going to be used by existing web tooling and testing frameworks, like for example Selenium? So those testers do not have to relearn, let's say, the user interface they know from the existing tooling?
Yeah, so the question is this going to be used by existing test frameworks? And I think yes, so Puppeteer, for example, is already being ported to that. So that's a common one. I don't know about Selenium. I haven't checked this, but I know about Puppeteer. And of course, yeah. But otherwise, I don't know. Out of time. Okay, sorry, Liz, let's talk outside. If you have still questions, there's the hallway track, yeah?